This would be our study lesson guide for the Big Trip Up Yonder. And as our brief biography of Kurt Vonnegut, which we've went over in previous lessons, and the context of our setting. All right, so as you're reading science fiction dystopian stories, the settings are somewhat of a mystery to figure out. So as we figure out throughout the story that scientists have invented anti-garrison, which is a medicine that would stop people from aging entirely. However, we might notice things that even though society has cured aging, they have not addressed any problems such as housing or food, because we definitely see that everyone but Gramps is eating like sawdust pancakes and fake food, which does not seem appetizing whatsoever. And for your historical context, okay, there is an allusion in this story. Gramps' full name is Harold Ford. And this would have been an allusion or a reference, a real life reference, to Henry Ford, who obviously would have been the maker of Ford automobiles. And it kind of opens up this idea that what would happen if the billionaires and the millionaires didn't die and they just kind of literally hoarded all of their wealth and power, even though Gramps doesn't really seem to have much power. Well, actually, he kind of does, because in the end, he gets the police to come. So that would be something that maybe Gramps does have a little more power and influence in this society than we think he did. Another funny part about it with the connection of the Ford is the Gramps is obsessed with like NASCAR, this Indianapolis Speedway. So that could give us another little one. And in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, a crowded future society literally worships Henry Ford. So another reference, another allusion to another piece of literature. And here you could see our breakdown of the plot structure. And sometimes when I'm trying to break down a plot structure, I will first look for the climax, where what was the turning point of the story. So the turning point of our story is when Gramps sees that Lou was messing with the bottles of anti-garrison. And then the following action, Gramps is gone, leaves a note and a new will, leaving everything to all his descendants, share and share alike. And so that would be the following action when things start to go really poorly for the family because they're all fighting. And then the police come. This is another really interesting part of the story where the police come and film the arrest, which is so ironic because Kurt Vonnegut Jr. would have wrote this story in 1954. And one of the longest running reality shows is a show called Cops. It's still on today. It has that song, bad boys, what you gonna do? But anyways, this show basically films cops and it goes from neighborhood to neighborhood. It's been around since like the 80s. And they film people getting arrested. And the people who get arrested actually have to they sign something that say, because sometimes people's faces are blurred, but then other times people kind of like, I guess, want their 15 minutes of fame and they allow themselves to be filmed on Cops. But the purpose of Cops, the show, is a way to deter crime. Because if you know that your arrest is going to be filmed and viewed by 500 million people, you might not do your crime. Maybe. I mean, obviously there's instances where people is a crime of impulse and they just didn't even think about it. But then other people, they might think about it. Before they do something, they might say, wait a minute, this is going to be on TV. I better not. So that shows this, the ending kind of shows one of the ways where how these people are policed. Because if the Eastern Seaboard has 500 million people, then that basically means that America has 1 billion. And right now, America's sitting around, this is 2026. I believe we have around 333 million people in America. So this would be way, way, way more. Double the population here. Then we have our twist that Gramps set this up. He was never a husk. They had called him a husk of himself in the bed when he had left, and he wasn't even there. So he literally just ran out of the house, pretended to be dead, wrote a will that wasn't really a will, just said everything you guys figured out and split that bedroom amongst yourselves. So that would be our resolution. And we also get an idea that, like, because Gramps kept saying it was going to be his time. He was going to go take his big trip up yonder. And the big trip up yonder is an idiom for death. People would say, oh, I'm going to take my big trip up yonder, meaning I'm going to be dead soon. So this tells us we can assume that Gramps probably isn't going to try to end his life anytime soon. He's going to be immortal here. And the fact that these anti-garrison remedies are just sold with no care about how people actually live, it kind of leads us to think that nothing's going to change about this society. And then this would be our breakdown of all the literary elements and devices that were used, if you want to review these before you answer your questions. Or if you've already answered the questions, then we're ready to go. If you haven't answered the questions yet, and these would be our vocabulary terms. So you want to pause the video, and then come back and we'll talk about our answers. All right, so we have summarize the story's ironic resolution. If the readers assume that Gramps' behavior and consumer habits are typical of everyone in his generation, people have controlled the money, the housing, and the television for more than a century, how would that explain the lack of new innovative products and entertainment in 2185? Well, if we're thinking about a capitalist society, and if all these very, very elderly people living over the age of 170, 100, and 200, you could say that they're the ones that buy things. And it does not seem at all, well, we know for a fact that Lou, everyone else living in this house, they have no money. It seems like it's very much of a struggle for them, because if they did have the means, we could really assume they would leave this house. In fact, the irony is they like it better in jail, because in jail, they actually have privacy. And we even see the effects of no privacy, which is actually a proven thing, that it can bring great stress upon people. And when she's there, she says, look, I'm not even shaking anymore. For the first time in 40 years, I haven't got the shakes. So they would prefer to live in prison rather than live in this crowded apartment, with Gramps basically creating a very hostile living situation. So for this, you could say the ironic resolution is Lou and the rest of them actually prefer to be in jail, because the cramped living quarters is so unfit for people's happiness and people to thrive here. And we can also say it's ironic. Well, I wouldn't actually call it ironic. This is just how capitalism would work. Businesses, their goal is to make a profit. So if they were going to be selling like housing, affordable housing units, that might make them way less money than selling anti-garrison that all these older people want to consume so that they can live forever. So the irony here is that only the companies are only appealing to the wealthy. So they're creating a society where the wealthy are going to live forever and consume this anti-garrison, and there's not any other innovations or products being made that are helping humanity better themselves. Like, why is there they can't figure out how to make like eggs. Eggs is like this great luxury. Why would that be? We would say that the money seems to be going to keeping the wealthy alive and entertaining the wealthy. And those that have to live in poverty are kind of just at the subject, being oppressed by those that have the means. So that would be the irony, that in the end, they would rather go to jail. Or you could also say it's ironic that Gramps' consumer habits and the elderly people, that if we're not being a little mean here, they should be dead, but the society as a whole caters to these wealthy, immortal citizens as opposed to the people who are struggling. Anything you could say a lot of things, you can find a lot of irony in this story. So as long as you're backing it up with evidence. My evidence I might use to say how I prefer it in jail is her shaking hands. And also the anti-garrison ads in general. The ad itself shows that the people who are catered to in this society are the wealthy immortals. And they're happy than they ever were home. The turnkey threatens to throw prisoners out as a punishment. A turnkey would be like the warden or the prison guard. What does it reveal about this society when jail offers more privacy, comfort, and peace than the family life does? How does Vonnegut use the setting of Building 257 to create the story's conflict? Well, we definitely have all of them arguing constantly over the room. And even here, they're saying like, I like that. Lou ought to have it as you do. As I ought to say for the oldest who's still working, you can snooze around here all day waiting for your pension check while poor Lou stumbles in here after work, all tuckered out. The pension check is an interesting thing too, because pensions, Europeans have the pension check, and then in America we have Social Security. So this idea of Social Security is old. Once you're 65, you can collect this Social Security. And it would be money that's kind of piled up into a big giant bank account, basically, that's held. And we could say if people never die, then they would just be collecting their pension checks for eternity. That not really work. And another part about this story we might notice, there's 11 couples, but they don't have children. So we could possibly assume that having children, you would hold off having a child until you had your own apartment or at least your own bedroom. So these people are sleeping in the hallway and there's a 1-day bed and then Gramps has the room. So it's basically making it so they can't, the family life is paused. Everyone's life is paused. You have these families, generations living together. The one, when he goes into the kitchen, he's 50, and then Lou, when we're talking about Em and Lou's son, like, how would you really have a family when you're living in this tiny apartment? So it creates the conflicts, and there's definitely irony at the end that they'd rather be in jail than living in their house, because the apartment, it just is not suitable for a thriving life. Everything from the food to the lack of privacy to their lack of autonomy. They can't even really hold conversations without Gramps yelling at them when the TV's on. It would just be ironic that they'd rather be in prison. And then our last question there, he names his overcrowded family Ford, an allusion to Henry Ford, the automobile pioneer whose moving assembly line mass-produced millions of identical cars. The story ends with the television commercial selling super anti-garrison to anyone with a few dollars a day. What is Vonnegut satirizing? Satire is just satire would be like sarcasm, but more like Saturday Night Live is an example of a satire, or like a parody, where you take something that's happening in society and then you make light of it, or you make it. Satire can also become off as offensive, because if something's wrong with society, then you kind of play it up. That's what Vonnegut is doing here. He's showing the criticisms of this society. And he's saying, what is it? Satire is satire about American consumer culture, the belief that we should always produce more, buy more, live longer. Use a Ford allusion, at least one detail from the super anti-garrison commercial in your answer. Well, some of them, the one anti-garrison is saying, do you want to live forever and not show any signs of aging, indistinguishable from everybody else? You don't have to save. Safe, tested, super anti-garrison costs you only a few dollars a day. So basically, individuality is definitely disappearing in this society, because your age can says something about you, how much experience in life you have, what your life was like. So everyone living the same and not being able to tell them apart is definitely taking away individuality. And this idea of consumer culture he watches the one show, The McGarrity's, and that I could say you could kind of compare them to maybe the Kardashians in a way, the McGarveys. They had been watching them for like over 100 years. This same family on TV, this society. You have Gramps watching the same exact shows as he's always watched. He's not watching anything that seems very innovative or something that teaches him or betters himself. It's just watching the same things. So this would be the consumer culture, that as long as people are buying these things, it's not going to change. This idea of producing more, buying more, living longer, if that's all you're focused on, and you're not focused on bettering future generations, it would be showing the selfishness of this society and showing specifically the selfishness of the wealthy people, where they don't really have any care about how their future grandchildren, their own children, or their grandchildren might be living. They only care about how long they're going to live. So this is showing us this selfishness. And you could say, what would be the problem in a society if companies and governments only catered to the wealthy? And this would be the symptom of that. What can happen when societies only cater to the wealthy? They're not trying to help the poor. They're not trying to help people to have housing or food or clean water. They're only helping the wealthy live longer. And we will see what happens in a society like this in the next story, because the Big Trip Up Yonder would be considered the prequel to Be or Not to Be, which is our story in our next lesson.